Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. If you are a regular viewer or listener to this show, you know that one of the things we talk a lot about is the Texas House of Representatives, the Texas legislature, Texas policy, and the direction that our state is headed. So today I'm going to have a conversation with David Cook. And David Cook is the consensus candidate that a majority of the Republican caucus has already decided to get behind. He already enjoys the support of a majority of Republicans who are going to be serving in the legislature in 2025. And not only have they supported him, but they have also come out and kind of designated themselves the Reform Caucus to some extent, meaning they're going to do things differently than how they've been done for the vast majority of time I've been in Texas politics, and probably the vast majority of time most of you have been in politics. So many of my listeners and viewers, when I meet you out and about, a lot of you didn't even get involved until 2016 or even 2020 during Donald Trump's initial re-election campaign. And so the only Texas House that you've seen has been one that has been more at odds with the Republican Party, with the Texas Senate, and often standing in the way of some of the conservative policies that we care about. So today, I'm going to talk to Representative Cook a little bit about his background, what made him decide to run for Speaker, and just some of the important policy reforms or even just structural reforms he's considering and articulating to his colleagues as they consider voting for him for Speaker of the Texas House. So with that, let's go to my conversation with David Cook. David, thanks for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for the invitation to be here.
Why don't we just start with you giving us a little bit more of your background, kind of I know before the Texas House, you served as a mayor of a rather large city, but you're somebody who's been in and around Texas politics for quite some time. So just give us a little bit of the background of at what point you first were ever interested in the political process to now deciding to run for Speaker of the Texas House.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Tarrant County area in Mansfield, a lifelong Mansfield resident. And as I graduated high school, I had expressed an interest in becoming a lawyer. And so my guidance counselor, a guy named R.L. Anderson, said, hey, I can get you a part-time job with this guy named Harold English. Well, Harold had a brother named Roy English who had been in the Texas legislature and had been a county judge here in Tarrant County. And when I met Roy, I was like, I want to be like that guy. And really what I saw was someone that was able to really, have a passion for working with people and providing solutions to problems, because I saw he did that not only as a lawyer, but also as an elected official. And so I went off to Stephen F. Austin State University and majored in public administration with the hope of, starting a path of becoming a lawyer and ultimately somehow becoming a member of the Texas legislature. For whatever capacity that might be in the legislature, I was just looking forward to trying to create a path for myself in that regard. And so as I finished at Stephen F. Austin, I was able to go to work for a guy named Chris Harris, who had been a state senator for a long time. And he had served in the House for 6 years and in the Senate for couple of decades,
a
long time. And I also had an opportunity to intern for the local state rep in Nacogdoches at the time, a guy named Jerry Johnson. So I got my feet wet there and was able to drive Rep Johnson back and forth a little bit to Austin. So it saw a little access to the Capitol. And when I went to work for Chris Harris, I was just full-fledged, emerged into the Austin Capitol process. I mean, I lived with him, drove back and forth between Tarrant County and Austin on a regular basis, and really just was able to pick his brain and just really had that desire even, solidified more so that I wanted to serve in the legislature at some point in time, whenever that might be.
So you went from kind of working almost on the operative staff side. At some point, you decided to kind of break into private business. At what point did that happen?
Yeah, so just as I got out of undergrad, and started law school is when I went to work for Chris Harris, and not only in the Senate, not only the legislature, but I was also working in his law office as well. And so he and I became partners eventually, and so it gave me an opportunity to work as a lawyer, but also to have experience within the legislature as well.
Primarily, what do you do as a lawyer?
So as a lawyer, I'm board certified in family law, which does a lot of divorce work, child custody work, and so that was an area of expertise that I gained while working on Senator Harris's staff back in. I'm dating myself here, but back in 1995 was the last time that the legislature basically rewrote the family code, recodified it in 1995, and that was the session that I worked full time with the senator, and I was on jurisprudence, the committee that I staffed as a staffer was jurisprudence, which is where that bill went through. And so as a result of that, it kind of became a subject matter expert and eventually became board certified, in that area. And so, but also, we do a fair amount of, representation for small businesses, real estate matters, and things like that.
When did you first run for office?
So 2008. So, I started again in 93 with Chris. And so not until 2008 did an opportunity present itself, a local mayor that had gotten elected, worked really hard to get elected, and as I often say, he worked just as hard to get unelected. And there was a recall petition filed, and he eventually decided to resign. And so with the input from Senator Harris and others, I decided to make a run for mayor of my hometown, the city of Mansfield, and it's something that I treasure. Had the opportunity to do that for a little over 12 years, and just felt like I really was able to make an impact in my hometown and do that over a long period of time, and at a time when our town was experiencing substantial growth. And so it was, I think, a good position for me to be in, and really just be able to lean in and help our community grow in a responsible manner.
What's the population of Mansfield?
It's around 80,000 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the population growth from when you took over to the time you served?
Yeah, I think it probably grew by probably 20%.
And that's massive for a city.
Yeah.
Right?
And then, if you were to look at our ad valorem on the, the commercial side, it would be very substantial. I mean, our growth was, our strategies were to make sure that, we're going to grow. So make sure we grow responsibly and try to make sure that growth pays for growth. You always hear that, but that's really what we were focused on, making sure that we were having quality growth that would pay for itself, so that, it would take the tax burden off of the citizens over time.
In 2008, I was 18 years old, and it was like September. So I emailed a donor that I knew at the time and said, hey, I want to do some stuff in the general election, just help out wherever I can. Tell me what's important. And he emailed back and said, Bill Zedler really needs help right now. Mm-hmm. So I started 7 weeks out, and I would wake up at like 5 a.m. I'd recruit 2 or 3 of my friends from San Antonio, and we'd get together at 5. We'd drive up. We'd get to his block walk at like 9:30 or 10, and
Impressive.
then we would block walk for 8 hours. I have all these pictures when I was 18 of like all these, and I had to rotate through my friends because after convincing them once, they'd be like, I don't want to do that again. So I'd find 3 more
busy.
friends. Yeah, I'd find new friends every week. And then I took a week of vacation, actually 10 days of vacation, and came up and sat outside of early voting polls 7 to 7 with Bill at the largest voting location in Tarrant County for all of early voting. So Chris Turner, who defeated Bill that year.
That's right.
Chris Turner was there. Wendy Davis was there. Kim Breimer, Bill Zedler, myself. It was literally like 15 of us. And these voters, 2008 was that record turnout with Obama that he really pulled a lot of these voters out and swept out quite a few Republicans.
Sure.
We only had a 2-vote majority after that election, 76 Republicans, 74 Democrats. Right. And so anyways, I was there with Bill every day. I'd go get him a Jamba Juice. I memorized his Jamba Juice order. We'd go get him one every morning and for his breaks. So while you were running for mayor, I was, driving up a bunch of random college students to block for Bill.
When you start talking about the fall of 2008, because I got elected obviously like in May of 2008. In the fall of 2008 is when we had the subprime market crisis across the country, and so it was exciting to get elected, but it was a difficult time right after stepping into the office. But talking about Bill reminds me back in 2002 is when I believe it was the first time Representative Zedler was elected, and with the input and suggestion of Senator Harris, I actually looked at running at that time, and I guess I would have been in probably early 30s, probably like 30, 31, something like that. When we looked at it, and ultimately it became apparent that Representative Zedler was the best person to make the run. Yep. So we decided not to run at that time.
Yep. And then you ran to replace him.
Right.
2 cycles ago?
That's right.
3?
Yeah, in 2020, we had lots of, Bill and I had, breakfast several times and just had lots of good conversation. And really we had 2 goals, because I went to him and I didn't want to be that guy that come in and said, hey, you're out and I'm in, anything like that. It was a lot of productive conversations. And really what we established was, 2 goals. One was not to waste resources in March that could be, marshaled and saved for November. And then also to make sure the seat stayed red. And so, through that process, he ultimately decided to retire and gave me the opportunity to move forward with his blessing.
2020 was a year following Beto's close race with Cruz. So Democrats were spending literally over $100 million trying to flip the state blue, right? There
just
was this
before
huge
redistricting.
Yep. So they kind of had their eye on all these areas saying, we want to come in anywhere Beto did well and try to take back the Texas House, the Texas Senate, other places like that. So those elections were really crucial at that time.
I remember the number that was often quoted to me that was 85% of my opponent's money came from outside of the state of Texas, which is staggering.
Yeah. Tell me the difference between you serving as a mayor. You've been, kind of serving in that capacity where you've got to find consensus. You've got some Democrats on council, Republicans trying to figure out what to do for these local issues, to walking in. Before we get to just the last year, I want to ask about that first session. You show up. What are some of the observations you make early on as just a freshman in this body?
I think the lack of efficiency was the number one thing I saw right off the bat. And in local government, being on a panel of 7, you only need you got to count to 4. Obviously, going into the legislature, you got to up that count to at least 76, and so and obviously I knew that going in, but the level of inefficiencies really was just staggering to me. How much time we wasted on the floor, in the first couple of months of session, how often we would sit as an entire body while, maybe a handful of people were having discussions with the parliamentarians. The rest of us were, sitting in our seats waiting for this ruling. And, it'd be something like an hour where you're waiting for a simple ruling that, probably could have been, the issue could have been brought up the day before, rolled upon that morning at the start of business. There were lots of things that were going through my mind, but I just remember that first session just staring at the beautiful ceiling that exists on the Texas House floor. And while I appreciate the light fixtures and the beautiful ceilings, it really just really caused me to think, did I make the right decision? Because as a mayor, I always told my wife that, hey, I want us to continue to do this as long as we're making a difference, we're making Mansfield better, and we're making a positive impact in our local community. And I felt like we did that all the way through the time that we ran for state rep. And so walking into this new process, that I had been, shared with you earlier, I'd been wanting to do this since I was a, 17-year-old kid. I mean, that's when I didn't turn 18 until after graduation. So I remember I met Roy English, as a 17-year-old kid. And so, literally from that point, so basically all of my adult life, I wanted to serve in the Texas legislature. And I'm finally there and I'm thinking, this is not what I expected at all.
Yep. At what point did you decide that you wanted to consider running for speaker? Because you were there for a couple terms. Tell me the point in time in which you decided maybe the Texas House needs to go a different direction. Maybe answer it this way. I'm going to ask it this way. At what point did you decide that the Texas House needed to go in a new direction? Because that might have happened before you decided you wanted to run for speaker specifically.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it is two different times. As far as the first question is, when did I feel like it needed to go in a different direction? I would say, probably into my second term. My first term, like I said, I saw a lot of inefficiencies, and I wasn't necessarily joyful over the process itself, but I didn't really have anything to compare it to. As a staffer, you have a different viewpoint. So, my first session, I'm just thinking, well, maybe this is how it is now. And so I didn't really feel like there was, a need for change. I saw a lot of things that I didn't agree with. Yep. But going into my second session, and by the end of my second session, and I want to preface by saying second session as in May of 2023.
Yep.
We talk about all the special sessions separately. Yep. But by the end of May of 23, I really felt very strongly that the House needed to move in a different direction.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to throw your name in the ring for speaker?
Probably not until almost a year later. By the end of the into the special sessions. And so as we got into, was almost December, by that time I had actually had, 3 members, come up to me and, say, hey, you should consider running for speaker. And I really, I was, like anybody, was kind of surprised by it and hadn't really, as a second term member, had not really considered, myself doing that, even though I felt like there was a need for change. I had not, really, thought that I would be the person to move forward in that role. But so I would say that seed got planted, probably as frustrations mounted into the fourth special session. And, I had an opportunity to work with members and trying to, help them with their bills and, getting them set on calendars or trying to help them, negotiate their bills or, just things like that. And so I think they saw that I really did want to, I was just there for, for the right reason, in my opinion, which was to try to, pass good legislation. And I was willing to, roll up my sleeves and try to help anybody that wanted to do that. And so, like I said, so that would have been the end of 23, and probably not till spring of 24 did I really start to, consider, looking at it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. In part of your campaign, since you launched, you've publicly come out, and I'm probably going to forget some of the things, but you have said that Democrat chairs should end. There should be a Republican speaker pro tem. You've talked about the need to speed up the process, and we'll break some of these things down. You've talked about parliamentary procedures. I know you mentioned that in a frustration. The parliamentary process, speeding that up, a more transparent calendars committee, which you've served on, so you kind of understand the machinations of even that structure in particular, that committee. Sure. So let's break down some of those things, because I know in talking to a lot of the conservative members of the legislature and some of the incoming conservatives who are supporting you, they've said that motivates them, that they believe that your stance on those issues really does give the Texas House a chance to move in a new direction. So Democrat chairs is probably the one that's most talked about, right? A lot of voters know about it. Republican primary voters maybe didn't know about it a decade ago, but they know about it today.
No doubt.
So tell me about your stance on Democrat chairs and a Democrat having a Republican speaker pro tem. Why do you think making that change is necessary going into next session?
I really think that's probably the biggest issue, is the no Dem chairs, and I feel strongly about it because of this. I think that a lot of deals are cut, in order to obtain that support, and so I think it's paramount that a person that's running for speaker should not be going to the Democrats. We are the majority party, and we need to run the Texas House like we are the majority party that we are, and so when you go over and you're asking Democrats for their support, guess what? It's going to come at a cost, and so that's really probably been the biggest disappointment that I've seen over the 4 years that I've been in the legislature, is just some of the predetermined outcomes, because there's no other logical explanation. I'm a very common sense based guy, and there is no logical explanation other than predetermined outcomes, in my opinion.
Yep.
And so then you start to ask yourself, well, how did this happen? And in my estimation, obviously I wasn't there.
Yeah.
when these speakers are soliciting support from Democrats, but just knowing that that's happening in some capacity is very disturbing, must be eliminated, and so that's why I think it's so simple to look at the problem and say this is what has to stop, is eliminating Dem chairs.
Talk to me about the parliamentary procedure. You've talked about some of the problems with the parliamentary process, how it's been abused, how it's been used to kind of gum up the works, maybe beyond what's reasonable. I was talking to one member who told me he put all this work into working with parliamentarians about his bill, and I'll protect his identity just because he hasn't publicly shared this story anywhere I've seen. But he was working very diligently, trying to work in good faith with the parliamentarians, and ultimately they say, well, your bill has points of order, and here are the points of order on your bill. And then he comes back to them and shows them, well, according to your rulings in the past, if I make these changes so that they don't have this point of order, then my bill has these other points of order that you've also ruled on, and you're going to rule it this way. And ultimately kind of got back, well, yeah, that is kind of cruddy. And you get to this point to where you realize, wait, so you're telling me that the legislative body of the Texas House of Representatives is, according to this parliamentarian, not allowed to debate this policy. Like this bill written in this way is not allowed to be debated and voted on in any way. There's like no way to get there. Now, that's not every bill by any means. That's this kind of particular member's experience. But give me your perspective, maybe even from your time in the legislature to now kind of running in speaker and talking to your colleagues. Why do you think the parliamentary process needs to be reformed? Yeah.
So I think it goes back to the word I mentioned earlier, efficiency. And obviously it's the lack of efficient process that members are not they're not being utilized to the full extent that they have the capacity to work. And so what I mean by that is that we're sitting there as a full body not doing anything while a few people are arguing these points of order. And the thing I would like to point out is that the speaker is the one that makes those decisions, and obviously he can do that in a number of different ways. And we all know that we've seen different speakers or lieutenant governors handle it in different manners. And I myself would be I would definitely look to the advice of what a parliamentarian would give me, but ultimately it's my responsibility to make that decision. And I think that would be a stark change in what we've seen in the last two sessions, is that it's very obvious that it's a straight line of communication where the current speaker is deferring those decisions to the parliamentarians. And so I would not, in my opinion, I would not defer those to the parliamentarians. I would ask their input, get their advice, make a decision.
I do like explaining to some people who don't live and breathe this stuff like us what that means.
Which is most people.
Vast majority of people. But essentially, like you just said, the speaker is the one who makes the decision. So the speaker says, this is not germane, this is germane, this bill is out of order. And the speaker's ruling could be, the body can disagree with it, right? The body could say, we actually disagree with that. That seems wrong. We're going to vote on that. There's various mechanisms to kind of hold a speaker accountable.
Absolutely.
But the current scenario, as you've described it, is these parliamentarians, and people have talked about the fact that the main parliamentarian was Obama's lawyer and other things like that. But this Democrat attorney, if he decides your bill or your amendment cannot be added or cannot be voted on, right now, we've never seen the current speaker ever push back, disagree, make his own determination as somebody who's seeing the legislative process play out. So you're saying not only do you support kind of simplifying the process, but also as speaker kind of taking ownership of those decisions more so than just talk to this guy and...
Yeah, I mean, like I would say just maybe a easy example to talk about is a bill analysis. I mean, what is the purpose of a bill analysis? It gives you an analysis of the bill. It should not determine, the fate of the bill. I mean, now if something is misleading, in a bill analysis, then absolutely that's a different story. But if something is misspelled or, uses a, language that the parliamentarian doesn't like, just because, that should not be the basis upon which a bill, point of order is sustained and goes back into committee or whatever the case may be. But if you have a situation where, those decisions are recommended by the parliamentarian, but decisions made by the speaker, then it's going to be a better end result.
Yep. You have discussed speeding up the process. I mean, you already talked about that even from a freshman. So give me some of the advantages of speeding up the process in your opinion. What does that actually practically look like if you're a speaker?
Well, I think that number one, it changes the demeanor of the members. I mean, because like I said, most people, I'm sure, come to Austin to work as legislators for the right reason. They take time away from their family, away from their businesses, and I'm sure they feel like I do, which is as long as I'm doing things that are productive for $600 a month, I'm going to continue to do it. But if I'm down there and I'm not being productive, then I don't want to be there. I want to go back and spend time with my family, the businesses that I need to be running and things like that. And so I think number one, you're going to have a better, healthier body by people being proactive and being involved in a efficient process. And so I think that's what can be done. And so I think that's, a benefit. I think the other, primary benefit is just, having a process that people can rely on, as opposed to right now. I think the feeling is that if a bill needs to be killed, that's how it's going to be killed, is the parliamentary procedure. And that's not the purpose of a parliamentary procedure.
That gets into Republican priorities, and you've also talked about this, is making sure that the Texas House, the way I would describe it is just seems to be positioning itself in such a manner where it's attempting to try to pass these priorities. And I like contextualizing this for people. So y'all take 2,000 votes. I don't remember how many every session, but it's several thousand things that you're voting on, amendments, bills, passing a bunch of different stuff. The Republican Party has hundreds of pages of its platform. And if you broke that platform into bills, it'd probably be, 800 bills, 1,000 bills. It's a lot of bills. So the Republican Party goes through this whole process to say, hey, here are 8 that we think are higher priorities this year. It's ending in-state tuition handouts to illegals and various different other forms, some election integrity policy that the party's cared about for a long time.
Sure.
So you have said that you believe that Republican priorities should be voted on, I don't know the way I describe it, but just earlier in the session, right? And so can you talk about why that's important and how that might actually change the relationship between Republican Party and activists and groups and the Texas House compared to what it's been in the past?
Well, I think they'll see some connection between the two. Right now, there's an absolute disconnect between House leadership and the Republican Party and the grassroots activists as a whole, and that's unfortunate. Needs to be changed, must be changed, and that's a big part of what we are working together on. I think you kind of said something like that in your question. Is that the change that we are looking for? You talked about the Reform Caucus, and that is what we're looking for. We're looking for a process that's a process that is going to involve the grassroots, so that we know what their priorities are, we know what their direction is, and that those become our priorities. Now, as a Republican caucus, I'm certainly supportive of the Texas House Republican Caucus having more priorities, but our priorities should include and must include the 8 priorities that have been established by the state GOP.
Howdy, folks. It's Chris Salcedo from the Salcedo Storm podcast. You might know me from my TV show on Newsmax or my radio show on AM 700 KSEV in Houston. As a veteran broadcaster, author, and conservative political analyst, I've teamed up with Texas Scorecard to take a no-nonsense approach to the toughest questions Americans are wrestling with every day. Join me on the Salcedo Storm podcast, where I challenge the status quo and bring you fresh perspectives on the national, state, and cultural news. Tune in weekdays, available wherever you listen to podcasts.
No, that's awesome. And to your point, what I think it's kind of important, in anything you've ever said. I've never heard you say anything like, I want to use the current House the way it's being used just for more conservative policy. You've talked about changing the structure where ideas that I might disagree with or agree with are given this kind of fair chance. There's a perception, and different people would push back to this or not, but there's a perception that the weight is put on the scale, right? When you have 12 election integrity bills die, this gets to the deals you talked about getting cut or something, where nobody knows why these election integrity bills died. Nobody knows why they passed the Senate and died in the House. Nobody knows why they didn't get hearings for a while. And so what we do think is that if that policy were on the floor of the Texas House, it would probably pass, right? Because you're not against election integrity. Nobody else is. But you walk into a session, you're passing a lot of bills, you're serving on a lot of committees, you're doing a lot of work. You're not sitting there every day figuring out where election integrity policy is. You're not on that committee. You're not doing it. So if something like that is being thwarted, you as a member, if you've got a lot of other responsibilities, don't necessarily even know. And so when leadership decides to change the way we change the way we act towards those priorities, I think it really does benefit the membership significantly as well. Because now those members can kind of not have to worry about knowing whether or not the things that Republican activists care about the most are starting through the process. They know there's a good faith effort being made. That doesn't even mean you're not going to be able to force 76 Republicans to vote for a bill.
Absolutely.
Right?
Nope.
I mean, and I think we go into this session, 10, 11, 12 Republicans decide to vote against a bill. It doesn't pass.
Right.
And so depending on where we're at, and as Speaker, that's my question to you is, what is your position on a bill coming to the floor, even if it is a Republican Party and it doesn't pass? Do you feel like it's your responsibility to make sure it passes, or just to make sure that it has a fair process? I
think number one, it must be a fair process. And right now, I mean, it's in my opinion, it's certainly, like I said earlier, a lot of it is predetermined outcomes. And so I just want to make sure that my role is to shepherd, make sure the bills are shepherded through the process, and that they do receive a fair and impartial, hearing on the Texas House floor.
No, I think I honestly do think that that's what Republican leaders want. I don't think they're expecting their politicians to be able to force everybody to vote the exact same way they want to vote. You have a diverse body that you're serving.
Well, I think what members are hungry for right now, a lot of members are hungry for is to take some of that power away from the Speaker's office and return it to the members. And so I've explained, this in talking with members over the last several months, to say, hey, you can't have it both ways. And, because people always, talk about, that, the Speaker should do this and not do this and things like that. But if you're truly going to have a process where power is returned to the members, which is what I support, then, it is going to be a process where, if and when the vote comes to the floor, you're going to have to make your choice. But that's what you're elected to do, is to take the vote. And, it's up to the member, on how he or she will vote. But, if the process is going to be a more transparent, more fair process, and members are going to have an opportunity to pass their bills, regardless if they've been there one session or 20 sessions, and regardless if their last name is Jones or Smith. It doesn't matter. It's really about the policy, and it's their responsibility to get with the members and work together and convince 75 other people as to why they should share the same opinion as the bill author does.
So that actually brings up another point, and I've heard this from different people who have messaged me or whatever as concerns over any particular vote you would have taken in the past. Because, and this is not an indictment on anybody. It's just to say that you do not vote as conservatively as a Tony Tinderholt does, right? Or somebody like that. And so I would say if you take the Republican caucus as a whole, you're pretty in the middle of the caucus, right? There's really liberal Republicans. There's people would call them very conservative Republicans. And then there's the majority of the Republican caucus kind of there in the middle. And that's where you end up fitting. So if somebody as an activist looks at a particular vote you've taken, okay, and the one that comes up most is casino gambling. I know you voted in favor of casinos in Texas. I'm against it. You know that. But my question to you is, how should somebody view your voting record in light of your speakership? So is a David Cook speakership going to be a speakership that comes in and any position you have on an issue now ushers that bill through, and anything you've opposed in the past means that bill doesn't see the light of day? You kind of answered it in your first question, but I wanted to bring it up specifically to give you a chance to answer that, because it has been something that gets brought up by Republican leaders that I see across the state.
No, I think it's a great question, and one that I would certainly like to opine on. So I would say that absolutely not is my personal agenda going to be the agenda of the Texas House Republican Caucus. I mean, just answer that by saying absolutely not. As far as gambling, we'll just you brought that up as a specific example. That's something that a lot of factors went into my decision. It was one of the tougher votes, closer votes that I've in my mind. As you're going through bills, it was a tough vote, but I really felt like that. That the citizens of Texas should have the opportunity to decide that, and that really is what led me to the decision I made. But to answer your question, which is would I take that same position if I were speaker? And I would say absolutely not. So I think the role of a speaker is it's almost like a weak mayor, one that doesn't vote. I would in Mansfield, I was, not say I was a strong mayor, but I'm saying that I had a vote just like the other 6 members. So we had a 7-member body. We all 7 voted. There are a lot of city councils where the mayor doesn't vote, or the mayor only votes in the event of a tie. Well, custom has it that the speaker doesn't cast votes. There have been times, obviously, when the speaker has, but customarily the speaker does not. And so what I would say is that I think the bills that need to come to the floor need to be representative of the majority party. And so less a bill, such as gambling, less it has the majority support of the House Republican caucus, then it should not receive floor time, should not be something that we're voting on the House floor. I would even add to that saying that I know that there's strong opposition in the Texas Senate, and so that would be another reason as to why gambling should not be on the House floor unless it's passed out of the Senate and has a majority of the majority caucus, Republican caucus. If it doesn't, and we're using that as a specific example, but that would be a barometer that I would utilize regardless of the subject matter.
No, that makes sense. I mean, some people don't understand that the decision on what to debate in mid-April is not just a decision on that bill, but also a decision on a bunch of other bills that don't pass, right? So there are times that y'all might spend a day or two debating a policy that everybody on the floor goes, we know this thing's dead even if it does pass, and we don't even know if it's going to pass.
Sure.
And then when that does barely pass or barely fail, and the Senate's going to kill it, you've now spent 2 days, and then at the end of session, if some other Republican policy dies on the last day and everybody says we ran out of time, they start to rewind and go, well, 4 weeks ago we spent 2 days on this issue. And so your point, I wanted to kind of pull on it just a little bit, is that, and I guess this will get to your election of speaker, so let's get there after this, but a majority of the majority, meaning that, look, there might be 20 or 30 conservatives that oppose an idea, but if 50 Republicans support it, that's a whole different conversation. But there are some times where bills will come forward then only have 10 or 15 or 20 Republicans voting for it and the rest of the caucus voting against it.
That's a problem.
And so in those situations, you're saying we need to govern in such a way that really incentivizes the Republicans to work together as a caucus.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, people are, generally refer to it as a Hastert rule over, Speaker Hastert. And, I think it's good policy. It makes sense. And as the Speaker said, as Speaker Hastert said, it was just something that he kind of come up with. It wasn't a hard fast rule, but that's how he governed, was looking at the majority of his caucus and making those decisions. And because when you add that to the time that's wasted in January and February, when you add that to the time that's wasted on parliamentary procedure, you really start to see how much time is lost and how precious the time is that we have on the House floor to consider great bills. And so we need to make sure that we're not only making sure that the bad bills don't get through the process, but also that the good bills, we don't run out of time.
Yep.
You always hear about, the bill didn't pass because, we ran out of time on the House floor.
The Hastert rule can also be applied to the caucus vote for Speaker, right? So we have this, the Republican caucus is going to come together,
right,
and y'all are going to have a choice to make, right? When I say y'all, I mean the entire Republican caucus in the Texas House is going to decide whether Republicans come together and say, we're going to pick a Speaker, or however many Democrats we have, 63, 64, 61, 65, those Democrats are banked as a vote block, and then whoever gets their support only needs 10 or 15 or however many Republicans he needs. There's another Democrat running, Anna Marie Ramos. She might have 3 or 4 votes. Okay, maybe you need 15 or 20 Republicans. But the point is that somebody could take the approach to say, I got the Democrat votes. Dade Phelan kind of already did this when he said, I have the votes, right? And you've already announced the majority of the Republicans supporting you. So clearly he's saying, I have a bunch of Democrats and some amount of Republicans that he has not released. So we don't know who is or is not supporting him. Tell me about the importance of the Republican caucus coming together and wrestling through the process of uniting behind somebody without Democrats helping pick the next speaker.
Yeah, I think you said united, and that's a key word. I would say unity, comes out of the same root word. And so I think unity is what happened on September 20th, is that, there was a coming together of 48 individuals within the Republican caucus. As you know, we have 86, and I guess maybe 87 now with Sean Terry coming into the caucus, and definitely welcome Sean into the caucus for sure. But generally speaking, we've had 86, and so obviously that majority threshold of 43, and so it is significant that that we've had 48 people come together and make a decision on who should be the next speaker. And I think it's incumbent upon the 48 of us to stick together and not be swayed, by the argument that, the next speaker is going to be determined by 64 Democrats and a handful of Republicans. And I can tell you the group that was the primary basis upon which this group of 48 come together, and I think that'll be the same reason that other people join that coalition.
Yep. Let's talk about, and we're going to wrap things up here pretty quickly, but let me talk about Ken Paxton, because that has come up as well by a lot of people. Just tell me, one question I have is just if the vote were held today, would you vote to impeach Ken again?
No.
And just tell me also any of the process. Have you and Ken been able to connect, talk? Right now, the Attorney General really doesn't have a working relationship with the Texas House at all. So I want to know to what extent have you and Ken been able to at least have a conversation? And then what is the importance of the House working collaboratively with the AG's office?
Yeah, so you mentioned the process. And so, at the time, when I took the vote in May of 23, I believe that I was the only House member to record no votes in the House Journal.
Yeah, you were the only. I want to clarify that you were the only Republican that opted to vote against certain articles and for other articles.
Yeah, because it was that decision, of course, came from from the parliamentarians. Excuse me, that came from the parliamentarians. That decision that the House had to vote up or down on all accounts. We couldn't go through and say yes or no on each account. Parliamentary decision there, but I think that the question was asked for good reason, because people may have a different opinion on different counts, and so and the answer was that no, you had to vote it up or down on all of them. However, you could go to the Journal and make entries if you wanted to. So I made a statement that night, released a statement, put in the House Journal that that I would have voted no on 3 of the articles. That happened to be 3 of the 4 articles that the Senate threw out completely, and also in my statement, I talked about impeachment reform. And so that kind of, I bring that up to say that was kind of what I wanted to speak to the Attorney General about. And so, yes, I've had some conversations with the Attorney General and conveyed to him after seeing Lieutenant Governor had put out some additional interim charges about impeachment reform. And so I reached out to the general just to say, hey, back when I took my vote, before I left my office that night, I released a statement that says that we need impeachment reform. And if I can just take a moment, I would tell you that, the one that, really bothered me the most was that we did not have the ability, that if the body was going to impeach, that it's automatically suspended. And because due process was a big part of the, argument on why not to impeach. And, so again, you asked me would I vote differently today, and the answer is yes. And a big part of that is because of the lack of due process. Mm-hmm. And so I think from the due process standpoint, it's unfair for him to have lost his job for that period upon which, from the time he was impeached until the Senate, cleared him of those charges. Mm-hmm. And it's even more unfathomable to me that he has not been paid for his back pay for that time period. Because I know if an officer, police officer, I'm big back to blue, big police officer mm-hmm. fan, but I'm saying we all hear about those cases where an officer may be suspended for a period of time, he or she gets reinstated and they receive their back pay. To me, that's what this situation is. The Attorney General was impeached. It went through a process. He was found to be not guilty. He should be paid for the time period that he was not able to work. He was ready, willing, and able to work, and that's a small reform, but it's important. I'm sure the Attorney General certainly makes more than $600 a month. He's not like the legislature, and so that should happen, in my opinion. Just one person's opinion. Yep. But on a bigger picture, I think it's important that a future legislature would have the opportunity, if they felt like that someone needed to be impeached, they could decide whether or not that person should be immediately removed from his job or not until he is exonerated or found to be guilty of the charges. And so that's certainly something that I would like to see go forward next session, whether that's me filing it. If I'm Speaker, obviously someone else will file it. But if not, I'm certainly committed to the Attorney General that that's something that I would be supportive of and would be would commit to filing if I'm a member that's not a Speaker next session.
David, you and I, we have not always agreed.
Sure.
We have not always been in the same camps of the Republican Party. There's always various different groups and factions. There's a lot more than one or two or three. There's a bunch of different groups, but we're a diverse party. But the reality is that I do think that we're on a path where there can be less friction for Republicans moving forward. And I know in just one or two of the conversations you and I have had, we've talked a lot about the November elections, the importance of keeping Texas red. In this ongoing battle where Democrats are going to increasingly be incentivized to try to get Texas to be more competitive, I do think that we seem to be in this window of time where more factions of the Republican Party can come together. All factions of the Republican Party can come together and try to find a path to having less division as a whole. What I feel like you've articulated here is definitely something that moves our party in that direction and moves your chamber in that direction. So I'm grateful for your willingness to sit down. I know you'll sit down and talk with a lot of other people and have conversations with people all across the spectrum.
Absolutely.
And so to some extent, that's what I want my last question to be to you is, what is your message to Texans? And I really mean Texas Republicans on any spectrum. Okay. There's going to be, there are people that listen to this show and watch this show that are in rural areas that oppose school choice, and there's people who are moderates and conservatives, and they do span the ideological spectrum. I definitely have a bent, and so most of my listeners and viewers do have that bent. But I really want to know what your message is to them in closing on what your speakership would do for the Republican Party as a whole.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I really think that's probably was the driving force of me deciding to run, because I felt like the current speaker, everybody has their own opinion. You're not going to hear me out slamming Dave Feeling as a person. I think he's a good person. I think a lot of people have opinions that differ from one another. Like you said, there's different factions of the Republican Party, and so my responsibility, if I were elected speaker, would be to bring the party together. And so really, that's what tried to do and having meetings and coming on to the Luke Macias show. I mean, that's, like you said, there's different factions. And so I want to be able to work with, any faction of the party. Obviously, I want to work across the aisle. Mm-hmm. I think it's important that the will of the majority prevails, but also the rights of the minority are protected. I think that's a good fair process. And so when you look at, what I will be continuing to talk about, I'll be talking about, between now and the elections, for example, any Republican is better than, you might be your least favorite Republican, but we have an obligation, in my opinion, to elect any Republican over any Democrat, period, end of story. And so we need to be working together as a party, whether you're, consider yourself to be in the middle of the party or to the furthest right of the party. We need to work together to get all Republicans, because we need as many Republican votes in the Texas House as we can get. Right now, like I said, that number is 86 or 87. If we can push it up, great, but we certainly don't want to see that number go down. And so the more infighting that we have within our party, that's the more likely that we will lose as a party. And so I just, want to be the encourager to tell people that we can work together. We're going to have our differences, but let's respect one another in those differences. But let's come together, have that unity, not only within the Texas House Republican Caucus, but in the Republican Party as a whole.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, David.
You bet. My pleasure.
Do you want to get your news from people who share your values? Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.